Welcome to Life Unrestricted.
This is your show if you're sick of living a life controlled by food and exercise rules, and if you're ready to learn how to accept yourself and enjoy the heck out of life. My gig is about body image, femininity, self-worth, and resilience. Come on, let's walk side by side as we slowly step out of restriction misery and unlock our true selves.
Your host, Merritt Boxler, is a former national radio DJ, freelance journalist, speaker, and writer with a passion to make women feel good in their bodies. This is a show brought to you live from Switzerland.
Hello, lovely tribe. This is Merritt again. Welcome to the life-changing adventure of the Life Unrestricted podcast. It's awesome to have you along for the ride towards body acceptance, towards self-acceptance, towards knowing about what it really was that has kept us in this loop of trying to make ourselves smaller, trying to dim our own lights without really knowing what we were doing. Really why we were being quietly mad for so long, listening to what diet culture told us to do, listening to what this whole culture told us is worthy, and trying so hard to fit in, just to fit in, no matter what the cost, right? So it's beautiful to see how many women have written to me saying how valuable this podcast is to them, and really thank you, first of all, and also this podcast is equally valuable for myself because stepping out of this old toxic paradigm of diet culture and sizeism and weight stigma, stepping out of this is not so easy. Self-acceptance and body acceptance without all this mental obsessing and restricting all the time, that's not easy because we're basically running against a $60 billion industry. And we're kind of, I think we're kind of the cool kids, but society doesn't know it just yet. But really, we're rad. We're doing a great job trying to really accept ourselves, because trying to love ourselves for who we really are without trying so hard to be someone else, that's a radical act. And that's going to liberate ourselves in the end. So yay to you, yay to me. And I really want to thank everyone for writing these beautiful reviews on iTunes. It is so lovely to read them. When I have a bad day, I just can go there and read what you guys wrote about this podcast. And it's really moving. And it's not only making my day, but it really, really also helps to win this iTunes battle, because it takes continuous good reviews to ensure that this podcast can be found by other people who are looking for it in this health genre. So it's really important for others who need to hear this message to be able to find it. So thank you for making the effort to write one. I really love it. And what I also colossally appreciate is your willingness to help me keep this podcast going by supporting the show on Patreon. This Patreon platform, that's a great way of supporting creative projects. And if you check out patreon.com, that's patreon.com, patreon.com/lifeunrestricted, you can really help me a great deal to at least make this endeavor a zero-sum game, because podcasting is expensive. So check out patreon.com/lifeunrestricted and consider making a small repeat contribution. This week, I'd love to express my incredible gratitude to Rob. I mentioned you last time because you were the first, so thank you again. To Mary, to Evelyn, to Tasia. I love you all. Really, thank you so much. Your support is everything. But now let's get down to business, shall we? In today's episode of the Life Unrestricted podcast, I'm talking to Dr. Maria Paredes from Greensboro, North Carolina. She's a licensed professional counselor and certified eating disorder specialist who describes herself as a 5-star listener, heart healer, courage instiller, lover of all bodies, self-compassion coach, voice amplifier, companion to those in pain, and a believer in hope. That's quite a self-description, isn't it? I love it. She holds a bachelor degree in psychology, a master's degree in school counseling, as well as a doctoral degree in counseling and counselor education. She helps people who are stuck in the diet binge cycle, as well as those who want to feel more comfortable in their own skin, which makes all of us. So she helps them make peace with food and their bodies. She offers individual and group counseling, clinical supervision, workshops and talks at school, workplaces in different communities. So, holy cats, quite a stunning resume. But that's not the most stunning feature of this interview today. Let's just say what you're about to hear was a step out of my own comfort zone, as well as a step out of the comfort zone for Dr. Maria Paredes. Listen in and find out why this wonderful conversation was entirely unexpected for both of us. Hi, dear Maria.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh my God, you're the most spontaneous woman.
I'm excited that you that I saw that contact this morning and that the time worked out. And I love those sort of unplanned happenings. They often lead to the best kind of things.
Yeah, I think I will just tell it to the audience the way it was so that everybody doesn't think, what is she going on about? Because this is a day where I'm reminded that life is officially unpredictable and sometimes in the very best way. Let me explain. So I had an interview scheduled for today, and as everybody's probably guessing by now, it was not with you, Dr. Maria Paredes. And yes, everyone can probably also guess I was well prepared for said interview partner, as I'm usually feeling insecure if I'm not prepped enough, and I think it doesn't give my interviewee credit enough, and I want to really bring out the best in as the interviewee, as well as make the best of the time we have together so that everyone can benefit from the discussion. And when today's interview partner canceled this morning, so very short notice, I was tempted to do what I usually do in these situations, meaning nothing. So I would have just rescheduled the interview and be done with it and done nothing today. But today, for some reason, something drove me to nudge myself out of my comfort zone. So I did what I never did before and reached out to a group of great therapists and practitioners, just on a hunch, trying my luck with those that I know. But what ended up happening was that I was recommended someone I didn't know, and that is you, Dr. Maria Paredes, a woman I had not ever heard of before. So when she expressed that she'd love to talk to me, I was feeling all dizzy and thinking, oh Lord, but I'm not prepared. I don't know what to say. I don't know her specialty and I'm not familiar with her work. And I was again tempted to stay safe and just schedule a date with you for the future. But then I figured, what the heck? The whole recovery journey is one big challenge. And my intuition told me to just do it. So here we are, you and I'm delighted to introduce to everyone and to myself, you, Dr. Maria Paredes. Hello.
Hi, and thanks for having me. And, I told you this earlier when we were corresponding that I'm feeling that same kind of nervous, unprepped feeling, and I'm hoping to channel it and into just sort of eagerness to be here with you virtually and eager to talk about these topics that are so important. And I think there's a couple metaphors in here for us too around those unplanned happenings and how that relates to recovery for sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one of the areas that I work with folks related to eating disorders and body image, but also just for folks who present with anxiety, is this idea of the unknown and lack of predictability. And so, I think a lot of us want to be able to predict our worlds. We want to be able to know what's going to happen. I'm particularly here in the United States, I've been laughing about it with just the election coming up, because people have been trying to predict who the next president is since the last election,
Yes.
and truly we don't know. I mean, ultimately, we can listen to all the different predictions, but we really don't know what's going to happen. And, it's the same with the weather. Even though we can look at lots of weather predictions, ultimately what's going to happen is going to happen. We can get kind of close sometimes. And I think for a lot of folks that creates anxiety because we want to feel secure, and predictability helps us feel secure. So when we don't know how to predict what's going to happen, when there's an unknown, it can create worries and just stress around, how do I prepare myself?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And there's kind of some assumption in there that we can prepare ourselves, that somehow we can prepare ourselves. And this gets at really existential fears around even just preparing for maybe the ultimate unpredictable happening, which is death. And I don't mean that in a morbid sense, but ultimately we don't know. We don't know how and when and what the circumstances will be around when we'll die. And that's scary. And people do a lot to try to avoid that fear. So how that relates to eating disorders and body image, I think there's a lot of trying to predict and control things that really are out of our control and that we can't predict, and based out of fear versus, operating from a place of hope, let's say.
I think we're going to go a little bit more in depth there, but I first want you to introduce yourself and your whole story. If you want to talk about that, that'd be nice.
Sure. I grew up in New York and, Italian-American family. I've got 4 brothers, and there were a lot of really, I think, wonderful messages about food and about body. And there were also some messages that I think were harmful in some ways. And I'm somewhat protective around, my family as far as sharing certain details. But I think in general, growing up in a culture where the message is very often that there's not enough space for all of us, and there's not enough space for all of ourselves, particularly I think for women, although I think men experience this too. And so messages of needing to be less in different ways and needing to shrink or minimize my voice or my body or my desires or my needs and those sorts of things. And, like a lot of women, learned that my body was really powerful in some ways, and then sometimes learned that was a good thing and sometimes learned that wasn't. I was an early developer. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a metabolic and hormonal condition that involves insulin resistance. And I was an athlete too. I was involved in sports, and over time developed a really negative relationship with my body and really was fighting my body in a lot of ways and not really learning to work with it. And it was a process of going to my own therapy and doing my own sort of just research and trying to just lap up as much information as I could about a different way, about how can I work with my body? How can I learn to be its partner? And how can I learn to work with food and not have to be afraid of food? I'm kind of putting a lot in a nutshell, but moving fast forward, I did a lot of just self-work around that. And then just also through learning to be a counselor and working with different groups, working on an EAT team, an eating disorders assessment team as a college counselor, and just really getting knee deep in the intuitive eating, health at every size world has been so healing for myself, but also empowering as a fellow just traveler, as a counselor, as a teacher. I want to give all this information to everyone else, and I want to be part of just having folks hear a different message, because we're so bombarded with a pretty unidimensional message of we're supposed to hate our bodies, we're not supposed to trust our bodies, we're not supposed to listen to our cues, our hunger cues, And I think those messages not only are wrong, but they're just so harmful, and they're kind of boring. They're not very complex, and I think it's really interesting the other kinds of messages of just how powerful our bodies can be and how they're really great sources of healing and strength.
You mentioned doing self-work before you really could immerse yourself in working with clients and before really adapting all the principles, Hayes principles and intuitive eating. How did that self-work look like?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was therapy, just meeting with a counselor who, specialized in eating disorders and, was the first person to introduce me to the intuitive eating book. This is over a decade ago. And, so some of it was just doing that hard work. I mean, going and, being vulnerable to the process, to the counseling process, and opening myself up to that, exploring what my relationship was and wasn't with food and with body and what I wanted to do about that. Even before that process, I was always sort of questioning some of the messages that I was getting around like fat phobia and bodies. And I grew up in a home where my dad was a guidance counselor and my mom had been a social worker and then a nurse, and were very sort of socially justice minded in the sense of like accepting everyone and not judging others. And I think I learned that really well, although it wasn't often applied to fat bodies. But I was trying to apply it to fat bodies. Like, why is it okay to judge certain things, but not other things? And so I was always sort of seeking out more information and trying to like find books and all that. And then particularly in my therapy process, which was a good 7 or 8 years, was, getting more materials and learning more. And, I have a lot of folks who ask me like, well, you didn't do your dissertation on eating disorders or body image, like, why not? That would have been such a good opportunity. And for me, I wasn't ready yet. And now, at this stage in my career, love that my focus is on that. I think I'm ready. And I don't know that I would have been ready then to be able to do this work. And I've worked with folks at various stages themselves, because I think some folks similarly feel that they need to be at a certain point in their recovery process before they can feel like they can dive in from a professional standpoint. And I think folks have to be aware of their own areas and really have explored their own relationship to body and food before they start helping others be able to do that journey. Otherwise, I think they might be harmful to their clients and also potentially be triggered themselves if they haven't really explored and healed their relationship with food and body.
Yeah, you are incredibly well decorated with all the education you had. I read that you work with dialectic behavioral therapy. I had some of that as well. And acceptance commitment therapy, ACT. Can you explain to us what those are and what your favorite ones are to work with clients?
I really work from a pretty eclectic perspective that I would say is grounded in relational cultural therapy. So I wouldn't want to sell myself as like a DBT or ACT therapist, but I think a lot of the core concepts around mindfulness and around building acceptance, radical acceptance with ourselves, I think are really core to my approach, but I wouldn't say I'm a DBT or ACT therapist. RCT, relational cultural therapy, is one that I feel like I could speak more intelligently about, which is really a feminist theory. And we all have our blocks. We all develop responses to experiences that we have. And a lot of those experiences that maybe have been negative or traumatic create resilient responses that we often are quick to label as bad, let's say. So binging or some other, behavior that we are quick to say that's a bad thing. Binging often evolves out of a very adaptive, resilient response to whatever might have been present in that person's life. And so RCT would look at those kinds of behaviors as how are they helping us move toward connection with others or move away from connection with others.
So let's make an example, because I hope I'm getting it right. Are you saying that if I binge, then that's basically the residue of what I once did, which was the only way to take care of myself or to have my needs met as a kid, maybe, and eat too much? And if I still do that, you would try and find out with me how we could put this into a healthier perspective?
So I want to say as a preface, like, I think, there are so many factors at play with any eating disorder. So it'd be hard to say someone binges simply because A, right? I think that there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's a lot of different factors that go into play. One of the factors that I think are at play are, yes, how people develop adaptive, resilient responses to traumatic or difficult circumstances. Whether it is as a child having a particular trauma, or growing up in a household where there's a lot of chaos, whether it's related to food scarcity, whether it's related, to messages that they're getting. I think folks develop binging as a way to cope with what's around them. And for a lot of folks, it, quote, works in different ways, in that it's an effective way to sometimes disconnect from experiences that are painful or traumatic. Over time, that disconnection, even though it may have been helpful in some way initially when the trauma was perhaps happening, it becomes maladaptive, and we need to learn safe ways to be able to connect better. An example that I often share with folks is actually a personal one, sort of a metaphor one that I experienced when I had something called torticollis. So after my second daughter was born, my neck locked up, and it was pretty apparent to me why. There was a lot of stress going on. I just had developed torticollis, so it was really painful to move my head to either side. And I went to the chiropractor, and he did some adjusting, but then he gave me homework. And he said, what I want you to do a few times a day is I want you to turn your head, you do it on both sides, but turn your head and turn it as far as you can go. And I'm telling you, this was excruciatingly painful. When I was locked up, I could not move my head, very little mobility. And he said, I want you to turn your head as far as you can go. And when you get to where you feel like you can't possibly go any further, I want you to take a deep breath, inhale, and on the exhale, I want you to go further. And I almost started crying in his office saying, oh my goodness, this is such a metaphor for the work I do with clients. What he said was, the brain is sending me messages that I can't move my head. But in fact, there was nothing preventing me from moving, right? Like, he could move my head very easily. It wasn't that my neck wasn't working anymore, but that the brain was sending messages, pain messages, communicating you can't move because my, let's say, neck had experienced a trauma of sorts and had sort of locked up. But the only way to heal was actually moving. The only way to get more movement and to get mobility back and get rid of the pain was actually to turn toward the pain and to move. So for counseling with folks, a lot of what I do is helping them turn toward the pain and really face it and get to know it and be able to make space for it, so that then over time they can be able to let it go when and if they're ready. And I think behaviors like binging are often ways of disconnecting from pain. And so a lot of our work is trying to learn to embrace it, learn to make space for it. So even making space for the binging, that's often something that my clients are really surprised by. Like, you're saying it's okay to binge? And I say, well, I'm not saying it's okay or not okay, but it just is. Before we try to get rid of it, let's really try to understand it, make space for it. And what they'll often find is when they do that, they start to not need it as much or in the same way. And they start to learn other ways to cope with what they're experiencing. And they start to be able to invite in some of those experiences more.
Walking towards the pain, you mean trying to find out where the behavior stems from, or the pain of the behavior, like the self-hate?
Yeah, both. I mean, and it's not always clear. For some folks, it can be a long process of sort of figuring out where the behavior stemmed from and what they're trying to achieve through it. But I do think it's often functional in that it's trying to meet a need. And I think often it's trying to, in some ways, connect them or disconnect them from something or someone, from a relationship they have. Part of RCT, relational cultural therapy, there's something called the central relational paradox. The central relational paradox basically says that we all have this drive toward relationships. We crave relationships, and yet often engage in behaviors that disconnect us because of fear of being rejected or fear that we're unacceptable or, bad in some way. Oftentimes that develops because we've had some sort of trauma around that relationship. Maybe we've been burned or we've been rejected. And so we learn to engage in these behaviors that distance ourselves from the relationship, even though that's what we're really craving. And I see that a lot with folks around body and food, where they're so craving to have a positive relationship with body and food, and yet they have maybe, quote unquote, been burned. And I often think that is a result of messages they've received, or just the diet world that we live in that teaches them they shouldn't trust their bodies. Or for a lot of folks that I work with who are fat, they've been bullied. And so even though they're craving this relationship with their body and with food, they start to engage in behaviors that distance themselves from it. Binging, for example, even though if you look at it just concretely, you think, oh, they're so connecting with food. They're eating lots of food. But binging is very often for folks a very disconnecting experience. And folks will often describe not even remembering the actual eating, not enjoying it. A lot of times one of the first steps is really working towards engaging with that more and really connecting even more deeply with food and with that experience sometimes of binging. And that's a really scary thing for folks who have, for a very long time, perceived it as bad and as shameful and dirty and gross and whatever other word they've attached to it. But through doing that, they can often experience a lot of healing when they're able to make space for it. And then they start to maybe over time see that, oh, maybe I don't need this in the same way. And maybe there's other ways to cope with some of the pain that I have or some of the trauma I've experienced. But it's not really, from my perspective, about demonizing the binging or even like aiming to get rid of it altogether. That we can even make space for what purpose it has served, even if over time they're able to let it go more.
That's interesting. That's a similar thing to what my therapist said. Like, we don't need to focus on your behaviors first, because I'm in a safe zone. I'm not anorexic. I'm just an over-exerciser and a nighttime binger. But she said, let's not demonize those behaviors and make you feel bad for them. Let's just check what the underlying issues might be and what you are protecting yourself from, or what kind of need you're trying to get met by doing that. And ever since I've started working with her, which is, 18 months or so, I have realized that without me actively trying to, certain behaviors the grip has loosened around my neck. So I have more choice to, say, rest more or to eat during the day, even though I had binged the night before, instead of restricting again, or certain things that were not possible. As hard as I tried, it was not possible for me to do in the first year. And I really hated myself for that for a long time, because I thought, this should be easy. Why don't I just eat more and rest more and gain some weight if that has to be, and get my cycle back? But it just, all my fears and all my traumas are hidden there in the body image, in the food, in the exercise. So she said it's even dangerous to take someone's coping mechanism away by force, because they usually just latch onto some other addiction, which I've heard countless times before, and I really don't need another addiction in my life.
Well, and a lot of this healing the relationship with body and food really at its core is trauma work. And when we think about how trauma is treated, you never want to put someone back into the trauma before they have some readiness and some coping strategies to be able to experience it in that same way. Otherwise, they can get quite flooded by the re-experiencing if they're not ready, and if they don't have some coping strategies for dealing with it. So, it can be a long and slow process for some, and that's also something that I often hear from folks, that it can be disappointing, because a lot of times the methods that they've chosen previously have all had this sort of quick fix, silver bullet, 5 steps and you're done kind of energy around it. And a very fast paced and just do this, just, eat this or just try this. And this work is slow and gentle, and I think that's kind of awesome about it, but can also for some folks be discouraging because it really is slowing down the pace at which they've been going previously.
Where do you expect the most resistance from your clients, or what are the most common struggles they have?
It really depends sometimes initially, one, where folks are coming from. Like if this is new, I have a lot of folks who will find me and find my website, and when they say what their goal is and what they're looking for is, will name that they want to lose weight. And I'm very upfront that that's not something I do and that, or that I know how to do, or that I'd want to do. And, we'll explain some of the reasons why around that. And so it's really kind of a big paradigm shift for a lot of them. I have a lot of folks who are post weight loss surgery. They've maybe had weight loss surgery and gained weight, or they've just had a history of yo-yo dieting, and they're feeling at rock bottom, but they're still clinging to the hope that that weight loss is going to be the answer. And so when I start to describe what I do and what I don't do and how this process is different, it's a really huge paradigm shift. And I will have some folks who, for different reasons, and I don't mean this critically about them, but for different reasons are not ready for that, and who maybe don't come back after a first session. But the majority of folks hear it and are maybe scared by it because of what it means. It means letting go of the hope that, weight loss will be the answer. They're scared, but they're also, often folks will say that it feels like that it really is connecting for them for the first time in a way that they haven't heard before or felt before. So, it might be right there initially when I start to describe that where the biggest resistance is. Or for some folks, they will hear it and be so excited and empowered and want to, read and listen to podcast after podcast. And then they'll, hit a point where they'll say something to the effect of, this is all good and well, but I still want to lose weight. Like I can do all this body acceptance stuff and this intuitive eating stuff, but I will lose weight, right? And so then it's the same kind of reaction that they're having to the folks who maybe, sort of disengage initially, but it's just kind of coming a little bit later. And, some of that is working through just some of the fears that are coming up, working through the paradigm shift of slowing down, of looking at it as a long-term process and, really sort of deconstructing and then reconstructing the way that they see their bodies and food, which takes time. But I think, the biggest resistance is around just wanting it to happen fast. Like, okay, I'll do this process, but I want it fast and I still kind of want that weight loss. And that's one of the hardest pieces, I think, for folks to be able to let go of.
So what I see there is, and I can only speak for myself, is internalized fat shame or fat phobia again. And that is the hardest thing, as you said, to get past. And that's what has kept me in recovered enough state for a really long time. Because as soon as the weight shifts too much, I get this fear again. So the question really is, how do we get past that? And I mean, it does take a long time. I see that. And it helps to expose ourselves to other bodies, to what is really out there, as opposed to what is presented by the media. But how do you help your clients getting past that internalized fat phobia?
Yeah. For some folks, it's part of their recovery is doing things like you're doing. So channeling that energy into something that feels positive. And it sounds like, from what I've learned about this podcast, that this has been a really powerful part of your recovery process. So being able to help others, and for some folks, connecting with sources, with groups, with networks of folks who are also on that journey towards healing their relationship with body food can be really important. From a relational cultural therapy, from the RCT perspective, connection with others in what's called growth fostering relationships is a really important part of healing. So, the diet world wants us to be competing with each other. They want us to fear that there's not enough for all of us, that we should hoard the resources, so to speak, and disconnect from others, disconnect from our bodies. And so what we do in response to that is, I think, try and connect with others. And there are so many messages, and I hope for a future day where maybe my 3 daughters will not have the same intensity of messages that we face today. But, we live in a world where we're all probably going to be bombarded continually with messages, and it's hard to avoid that. It's hard to not step back into our trauma in different ways, just living in the world that we live in, right? You can't go into a grocery store and buy food without passing by magazines that are encouraging maybe some of those trauma-related messages. Don't trust your body, eat this, don't eat that, the photoshopped images, all of that. So it'd be one thing if we could work with someone, heal the relationship with food and body, and then put them in an environment that had no triggers, right?
That'd be good, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it might and it might not. Certainly it's the glass bubble or the invisible bubble, so to speak. But I don't know if it would be good, because would we really be learning to cope with the realities that we live in? I do hope that our world will change, but I also want to help people cope with what's out there. And I think one way that people are able to do that is connecting with others or other sources of different kinds of information. So from bombarded with the thin ideal and the diet culture all around us, I think seeking out other places like podcasts like your own, or there are other, just materials, other people that are more interested in talking about other things, other ways of thinking, I think can be really helpful. So I think that's part of it. I think it's a lot of deconstructing where some of those desires come from. So, the desire to want to lose weight is a behavior, right? Just like binging is a behavior. I have folks who will say to me, well, I feel like I'm doing this healing process wrong because I still want to lose weight. Like, is that bad? And then we'll be surprised when I say, well, no, it's not, it's neither bad nor good. It just is, but let's try and understand it. You're having the thoughts about wanting to lose weight. You're thinking about what diet to jump on. Okay, let's understand what the function of that behavior. How is that connecting you or disconnecting you from others, from yourself? And but even trying to look at those behaviors from sort of a functional standpoint of what's behind it and what need is it trying to meet, and how can we meet that need in other ways?
It's pretty paradox, because that wish to lose weight has a strange way of connecting us to other people, because everybody seems to be talking about it.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that came to my mind first off, like the feeling of loneliness that I get sometimes when I'm not jumping on some diet talk train out there. And that can be a lonely place.
It very much can be. And I've experienced that as a woman, as a mother. I've talked with colleagues who are in the health at every size world about this same thing, where we're sort of the wet blanket at the gatherings, whether it's a ladies' night or whatnot. And inevitably, very often, the conversation in those kind of circles will turn to what diet or weight loss plan someone's in, or are they being good because they're eating a salad, or I'm going to be bad tonight and have this piece of cake and a glass of wine. But you're absolutely right. It is lonely to sort of swim upstream against, all the messages that we're getting around us.
Mm-hmm. Do you get clients that are discouraged by all that and say, why should I feel lonely out there, and trying to give up behaviors? Might as well just stay in my over-exercising or in my restricting or binging, whatever they do?
Sure, absolutely. But the folks who are generally coming to see me know that what they've been doing before wasn't working, and that it was leading to, let's say, more disconnection overall. But yeah, I think that's part of the process of moving through healing and connecting more to ourselves. Is sometimes like why people avoid the pain, like why I wanted to avoid moving my head in that chiropractic example was, it hurts to go towards some of that. But oftentimes to really be able to heal, we kind of have to move through that pain, not around it, not under it, not over it, but through it. And so sometimes, that pain is being lonely and being able to make space for that. Some folks are not ready or, don't have the supports around them. And so they turn back to what feels safe and what's familiar. And what's safe and what's familiar might be, remaining in those cycles of yo-yo dieting or restricting in whatever way. But I think folks want to feel better. And I think they realize over time those behaviors aren't really, quote, working in the ways that they maybe had previously, and working in the ways that they're hoping they'll continue to work for them.
And how do you encourage them? I mean, how do you describe the other side of this whole process to them so that they are encouraged to go ahead and liberate themselves?
Well, a lot of it is supporting their voice. So it is providing education to them around this, providing some of the research occasionally about dieting and what it does to the body. But a lot of it is really trying to empower their voice and lift them up and support them in what they're starting to notice. If they've found me, if they've come to me, they've been able to notice something about what I've been doing is not working. And so we try to sort of deconstruct that and understand it more. But a lot of that is trying to just validate and normalize what they're feeling, what their desires are, what their wants are, and so that they can feel like their voice is important and has value, and that there's space and room for their voice to exist. I do a good portion of talking in terms of providing psychoed, but a lot of what I try to do is really listen and let them start to come to some of those insights themselves.
For me, I think having a reward or some idea of a reward is helpful to step into that fear, because when I just know that it's going to be difficult, then I might be discouraged. So for me, it was seeing people like Virgie Tovar, Jess Baker, people that were fabulously confident in their own skin, and that cognitive dissonance that sort of evoked inside of me, like, whoa, I don't need to work all that hard to be accepted. I could try and just accept myself as I am. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's just so many great names out there now. Some of my favorites are Jessamine Stanley, Diane Bondi, who are both yogis and do a lot around helping make yoga more accessible for all bodies. Regan Chastain, the ravishly.com website has great material. And so, there are some definitely downsides to social media and to internet and all that. But for a lot of folks, I think what's out there in social media has been really empowering, because folks are able to hear different messages and see like, okay, well, maybe in my small circle of friends here and wherever I'm living, folks don't get it or aren't talking about it or aren't on this journey with me. But there are folks out there who are, and who want to embrace their body and learn to be kinder to their body, and who are doing it and doing it maybe, quote, successfully. And I think that has been really helpful for a lot of folks. So I have a love-hate relationship with social media, but I think it's really provided another source of connection for a lot of folks who maybe feel lonely and feel isolated in their journey toward healing the relationship with food and body.
Yeah, I was about to give up Facebook and everything just before my recovery started, and I thought I might as well just instrumentalize it all for my benefit, and it worked totally fine. So I was wondering if that's part of your work with your clients, so that you have some resources for them that they can inspire themselves, I should say, because living in a world with this toxic cultural mindset that only thin people are fully valued, it really is hard to step out of that war we have going on with our bodies. So there certainly need to be a lot of tools in place that we can do this and be successful at it, I guess.
And it's neat to see how fast more tools are being created out there. There's more people who are joining this conversation, and I mean, I think just in the time that I've been involved, just how much more discussion is happening, and folks are really exploring it in different ways and connecting it to other areas of social justice and intersectionality. And I think it's really exciting. And I hope that more people will be able to continue to find this message. I do tell folks with social media, like, listen to yourselves. Like, if you are going on there and finding that it's bringing you down and you're finding yourself, comparing yourself with other folks, and it's not a source of healing and connection, get off of it. Listen to your body about what you need. But if you can go on there and it feels like it is more connecting and it helps you connect with messages that are healing in your recovery process, then by all means continue. But I also encourage folks to make some decisions about who they're connecting with, and how they're connecting with them. And I think there are ways to maybe gear their social media use in ways that can be positive and healing, just as there are also lots of very negative, harmful social media resources out there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this morning I was really disappointed. I follow a really great guy on YouTube just for spiritual reasons. He has this really loving messages that he puts out, but I accidentally heard him say that he has just started to quit sugar like 2 months ago. And on he went and said that he feels awesome now and that he has a personal trainer now and that, all this body stuff. And I don't know, he's about 40, I guess. Mm-hmm. And he's really well known. He has a following of about 2 million, I think. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So he was going on about his success with his body journey and that he's so much better without sugar and that it was such an addictive substance and that he had sugar once and then he felt really hungover the next day and terrible this and terrible that. And then he went on and said something like, yeah, and I had this terrible relapse like a week ago. I was staying in a hotel and I don't know what happened, but I ended up eating a Snickers bar and then it was just like, whoa, and all hell broke loose. And apparently he ate the whole, stock of Snickers of the whole hotel. And
His
then he
body said, I'm tired of being starved.
And then I thought, oh no, what? The problem was that he was reinforcing the message that sugar is addictive and see what happens when you do that. I had a relapse. That's why we need to cut it out. And I was watching this and thinking, you have it all wrong. But there are, 2 million people listening to this right now. And this hopeless feeling was coming over me. Like everywhere, people are promoting stuff that will only drive us further and further away from a relationship to our body. And he was so articulate about cutting out sugar, even though he was typically saying what happens when we deprive ourselves of certain foods that we're going to binge on them. And it even happened to him, but he made it sound like that's the proof of sugar is bad.
Right. Yeah, and it's not, it's not good science. It's not good evidence, but it sounds so compelling and so exciting, that sort of glimmer of hope that he's describing to folks, that they grab onto that. And it feels easier to grab onto that than to think about therapy and meeting with a nutritionist who is health at every size oriented and starting that process that's long. And no, I want the silver bullet. And I think a lot of folks are really wanting something easier. And I don't mean that in a negative way about them. I think everyone's trying to live their lives in a way that's going to be easier for them, but sometimes ending up making it harder by pursuing some of these cut out this, cut out that approaches. And a lot of that's cutting out, their needs. It's sort of saying my needs aren't important or what I want's not important. And it is. There's enough space for all of us. There's enough for all of us. But that fear of not having enough or there not being enough space ends up creating less space. It ends up making us compete for those kind of resources.
Yeah, and it's so easy to sell weight loss and make it sound really, as you said, like the silver magic bullet. That is so easy. And it just depressed me that how well he articulated something that was clearly ridiculous, but the way he said it and the way he presented it and the way he was being on this diet now and looking different than 2 months ago, and everybody's like, yeah, it's possible. And I was like, no, please, that's what I believed for 20 years, and it led me down a very destructive path. And it's just so depressing to see that what we promote, like the real acceptance, the real work, the real inside job of happiness, like eliminating that middleman that says you need to be thin to be happy, just eliminating that and taking the shortcut to happiness and working on the insides is less popular. But it feels so discouraging to see that all one popular guy has to do is make a 5-minute video, and then another 200,000 people go, yeah, I'm going to quit sugar as well. And then that they end up binging and hating themselves.
Well, it's, when I look at that, and I think, again, like one of the harder things for folks to do is really turning toward compassion for all of them. So, compassion for him, like, what I hear from that is pain, like, the pain, what pain is he trying to run from, or what pain are his viewers trying to run from? And so trying to escape from it, they're turning toward, these quick fix kind of approaches that only disconnect them even further from the pain. So again, that chiropractic example, when they're ready to actually turn toward the pain, even though it is painful, and it's not saying that this work is like, easy and all rainbows. Recovery work is hard, but in doing that work, I think people experience so much freedom and just over time an easier, gentler way of being. But they first have to be able to be willing and ready to do the hard, painful work.
When we were talking about this celebrity sort of guy before, it made me think of how we pass on our own struggles and behaviors. And that made me think about the fact that you work with adolescents and kids and families as well. So as I see it, it happens pretty often that parents, or mostly mothers, innocently pass on their fat phobia or their weight obsession onto their kids. And sometimes this happens overtly, as in my case, where I was denied food and put on diets when I was very little. And in other cases, it's more like, say, the mother cooks for her children but eats something diety herself, or doesn't eat with her kids at all. But as we know now, children pick up that difficult relationship anyway. They sort of pick up the energy, and they are bound to have a difficult relationship to food and their body down the line as well. Whether we want that for them or not. So it's crucial to look at our own relationship to these issues first and start healing them in order to be a better role model for a kid. How do you help your clients or their children improving those body image issues?
There's a couple things I think of, and the very first thing is just myself as a mother, and I have 3 daughters, and so this is not just professionally sort of on my mind, but just as a mother and wanting them to grow and experience their bodies in wonderful ways. I think about it a lot. But with, my clients, I think first really coming from a place of assuming that parents want the best for their kids, and assuming that they're doing what they believe is right and what they believe is good for their children. Because I think approaching it from they're bad, they're doing these things, doesn't seem to be helpful typically, So really trying to tap into where some of the messages came from that they're operating from. Like, do they have quote unquote good information? Do they have accurate information? And, what might be the best way to give them information that will really be accessible to them? Like giving them a book to read, are they going to read it? Or what makes more sense, as far as providing some just psychoed myself, or giving them something that is briefer, like an article that maybe introduces some concepts. Parents, I think, are often overwhelmed, and that joke of, there's no book on parenting is not true. There's 5 million books on parenting. And I think parents don't often know how to sort through it all. There's almost too much information now out there about how to be a good, quote, parent. And so I think trying to approach it from what is a way that I can be compassionate towards them, assuming that they are really trying to do what they think is best for their child. How can I provide information that's going to be accessible for them, that's going to be realistic for them to really engage with, and then how can we get them on the journey too? Because so often my clients have a family member, very often it's mom, sometimes and dad, who are warring with their own bodies and warring with food themselves and don't realize how that is impacting themselves and how it's impacting their children. And I've found that parents when they've been given the invitation, often want to join in on the journey too, and want to support their children in the process of healing. Some are more resistant. I don't know if that's the best word. Some are more maybe stuck in their own fears and their own body hate and aren't able to, but I think many are. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Something
Yes.
I'm thinking about with this is like what I try to do with my kids. And, some of it is having grace for myself of I'm not going to be perfect and I'm going to say the wrong thing. And, trying to teach parents that it's not about like they have to say the right thing, but trying to sort of in general think about what's the overall message I'm sending, to my children about autonomy and about their bodies and about their own, needs and the importance of their needs and how to, answer those needs. So like with my own kids, I think about how I'm modeling that with them, sometimes making myself say out loud things in front of them, naming the positives, naming sometimes the ways that I'm frustrated, but trying to really present that in a neutral way so that they're not just hearing, oh, I hate my body, I shouldn't eat this, I shouldn't do that. Mm-hmm. And often I'm trying to emphasize the positive, maybe more so, gosh, I love my butt, I love how it jiggles like this when I'm moving. And, and it's neat seeing how they respond to that. I've talked about how my daughters try to claim my stretch marks. So the stretch marks I have from giving birth, which are really special to me, very special because they represent my daughters. And two of my daughters sort of fight over which ones are theirs, like Beautiful. Which one. Yeah. And I think it's a wonderful way of sort of being with it. And I've had folks saying like, come on, like you're saying you love your stretch marks. And I say, I'd be lying if I said I look at my body and every second of the day, I love everything about it. I don't think that's what body positivity is about. Certainly there are times where I look at certain parts and think, oh, it used to look this way, or it used to move in this way, or it used to do this. I just played soccer the other night for the first time in like 9 or 10 years, and I whiffed so many balls. My body's not moving the same way. Sure, that's frustrating. But I can both be frustrated and also sort of just be present with that. This is frustrating, or kind of like we said earlier, this is lonely, or whatever feeling might come up. And that's okay. I don't have to feel great all the time. I don't have to love every part of myself to actively love myself. I think it's a decision and a choice and an action. It's not just a state of being. Choosing to love my body, choosing to love all the parts of myself, including the ones that are sometimes frustrating or harder to accept in a world that's telling me I shouldn't accept them.
Mm-hmm. I think all of what you just said represents the whole movement for me, like coming to a place of acceptance towards our just simply being humans and being exposed to the process of aging and withering away and the whole cycles of nature. And I don't know, somehow I try and give myself hope and encouragement by telling myself, we are the cool kids now. The others don't really know it yet, but if I see all those people just promoting weight loss all the time and talking and pinching their stomachs and their thighs and talking about where they should lose weight or what they shouldn't have eaten, then it just sort of bores me nowadays. And I'm like, I think I belong to the cool kids club now, finally, with 43 years old. But yeah, it helps me to believe that because I see this community is growing. And we've heard the other story so many times over and over again, and none
it's
of
old
us.
and it's
Yeah, it's
boring.
old and it's boring, and none of us has succeeded, and it has not helped a single soul feel better about themselves. So,
I'd love to add, Merit, like a sort of caveat or addendum to your cool kid comment, because I agree with you. Like, I feel like, we've got the message, but the only difference I would say from like maybe the sort of metaphor of that is maybe we're the cool kids, but there's always enough space at our table for everyone else, and when they're ready, we will welcome them with open arms, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. But that's what I think is a really cool kid. And I was not talking about the coolness that I would try and achieve when I was younger, but the real coolness is actually a warmness that makes me know that I'm part of a community that is only just emerging and starting, and I'm in recovery myself. But one day, hopefully, we will be the ones that people want to join at their table, that we are going to be the ones that are here with open arms and saying, yeah, I've been there, done that. Welcome home. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I have a good friend who, when I was going through my journey, I would share some of the things about intuitive eating and health at every size. And this is a very long time ago. And she would always sort of poo-poo it or just sort of like not engage. And she was on sort of her own journey. And it's actually only been in the past year or so that she kind of started her own journey and reached out to me and said, like, hey, can you point me in a direction, like some materials? And I, gave her some, and she's been on this wonderful, awesome journey herself now. And we've had these great conversations where she said, years ago, I just thought you were crazy. I thought like you were just nuts with all this intuitive eating, health at every size stuff. And I only now realize like I just wasn't ready. And I wish I had listened more, and I wish I had engaged more in the conversation. And like, I'm so in admiration of her, for the journey now that she's on and the journey that she was on. I think they're all important parts of our journey, but it's, that idea of like, when folks are ready, this community is so awesome and welcoming. And I think we want to continue making more space for more people. There's always going to be more space. Let's bring them on, come on.
For space for all the people that are getting tired of the self-hate.
Yeah.
Because it really gets old, and our message is just so much more beautiful and loving and I don't know, inclusive. And that's what this world is needing at this point, I think.
Totally. We are on the same wavelength. And, it's funny, you said space for all. Yes. Actually, in Greensboro here in North Carolina. So Julie Dillon, who does the Love Food podcast, is also in Greensboro. And we're actually co-presidents of a group called Space for All. And it's basically an organization that is full of different eating disorder professionals who are local to our area and providing services. So we had a different name. It was called Fed Up, and it was an acronym for something. And, then Fed Up became like a title of a documentary that was sort of anti-sugar. And
yes, exactly.
And we said like Fed Up it had so many other connotations that were like, we need a different name. And we came up with the name Space for All. And for precisely all of these things that we're talking about, that there's room for everyone. There's space for all. There's space for all of us. There's space for all of my body and all of my needs and all of my wants and all of my hurts and traumas and all of my voice. And that's really the message I hope that more people can get. We don't have to compete for resources. There's enough for all of us, and there's room for everyone's, voices.
Oh, it's so beautiful. What's your advice for someone who has been on the fence, maybe, of taking the leap?
I think just be curious. I don't think you have to jump over yet. And like, I have some folks who are saying, I'm not ready to let go of wanting to lose weight. And I said, okay, I don't want you to let go of it yet either. Hold on to it. If you need to keep your foot on the other side of the fence, if you need to keep your butt on the fence, that's okay. But maybe at least just open your eyes a little bit more. Be curious. Maybe try and take in some different kind of information. Think critically about it. Think critically about the messages you've been getting. And that curiosity, I think, over time grows and becomes larger and more interesting. And folks want to learn more and hear more. And it becomes harder to maybe stay on the fence. So I don't think people have to leap over the fence. I don't think they need to jump before they're ready. They need to hold on to it for security. I think that's great. When they're ready, they'll know. And it might even be something that happens out of their awareness where all of a sudden they go, oh, I'm on the other side of the fence. How did I get here? You know?
Yeah, when stuff just processes are just starting to happen as we solve some internal struggles that we might have. Mm-hmm. Where do people find you? I mean, if someone wants to work with you, you are working basically on almost all the levels that one could possibly hope for when doing this kind of work. So how do we find you?
So I'm a private practitioner in Greensboro, North Carolina, and my website is www.threebirdscounseling.com. threebirdscounseling.com. You can find all my contact information on there. I do have a blog, and on that website you can find the link to, I have an active Facebook page where I post a lot of articles that are out there, sometimes my own, sometimes just folks who are in this community, and it's very much fat positive and weight neutral and, you know, health at every size oriented. And I love learning more and hearing from folks. So I have a lot of folks too that send me information, and I welcome it because I like reading more and learning more myself. And the neat thing about this is it's all evolving. We're learning more and more about how to apply, you know, these paradigms in different ways and how to create a more inclusive world for all bodies.
Yeah, it's beautiful the way this whole thing is expanding somehow. Why is your Facebook page called Body Politics with Dr. Maria Paredes?
Yeah. So yeah, my Facebook page came before the name of my practice. My practice is Three Birds Counseling and Clinical Supervision. So the Facebook page, Body Politics, this kind of gets back at the conversation we were having earlier about being the wet blanket in conversations. You know, I have my own personal, just private Facebook page where I interact with family and friends, and you know, I would from time to time post articles, you know, body positive stuff, fat politics stuff, and I would get a varied responses from folks. I'd get some folks who are like, yeah, that's awesome. And from a lot of folks who would say like, this is crazy, you know, in different ways would communicate that they thought it was just too far left, so to speak, and too much. And I made me more and more want to share even more of the messages. And so I said, I'm just going to create, you know, a professional page. And at first it was just kind of experimenting with it. And then I was getting a lot of really positive responses, and I think folks wanting to hear more of the message. And I think some folks are just not ready. And so I invite folks to come to the professional page, friends and family, and some are there and some don't want to hear about it. And I'm okay with that. You know, they don't need to hear about that. And maybe if and when they're ready, they'll want to hear more of the other side and engage in that conversation. The reason the name is because I think the body has been so politicized, you know, women's bodies in particular, but I think all bodies, particularly fat bodies, have been politicized. I listened to the podcast you did with Linda Bacon, and I think she spoke to that so well about just how political the BMI is, and how so many of these messages that we assume are based in health and based in our well-being are actually based in money, in politics.
In money. It's terrible. Yeah. Oh, God.
And so I think the body is political, and I wanted to sort of emphasize that and engage with folks in the conversation about how we can take back our bodies and reclaim the discussion around that.
It's so beautiful. I'll make sure and link to your website and the group in the show notes. Yes, of course. And I really like the name, Body Politics. It sort of frames it in a really cool way and in a smart way. I really adore the name. So my last question for you is, what would you like to be remembered for?
Oh, I would like to be remembered for, and it depends who, like my kids versus who I'm working with. I'd like to be remembered for helping people be kinder to themselves and others. I mean, when it all boils down, like all of these things that we talked about and everything in the body positive movement, I think it gets to being kinder and gentler to ourselves and to others. There's enough for all of us. There's enough resources for all of us if we operate from that belief. It's when we are operating from a belief that there's not enough and that we have to compete with others and ourselves that there becomes less. I'd love to be remembered for helping people be kind to themselves and to others.
Wow, I love it. And Maria, I have to say, what we did today was pretty awesome, wasn't it?
Thank you so much for taking a chance on me, having not known me or my work. And I'm so grateful for these kind of, unpredictable happenings. It's really great to connect.
Yeah, I learned something today, and I'm sure you did too. And that's the best thing ever. So thank you so much. And I wish you a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too, Merit.
This was today's dose of badassery from Life Unrestricted. Find the show notes with links to everything we mentioned in this episode over at lifeunrestricted.org. And if this show is making you feel good, awesome, make sure to subscribe and please let others feel good too. By leaving a 5-star review on iTunes, you'll help make this show more visible and therefore more accessible for others. You're the best. Thanks.